There are moments in a man's life that seem small when they happen. A knock at the door, a question asked in passing, a stranger standing under a flickering shop light. I didn't know that the night she walked into my garage would change everything. It was close to closing time, the kind of Saturday evening when the whole neighborhood felt tired. The air smelled like rain on pavement and motor oil. I was halfway under the hood of a Honda when the door chime rang. I remember thinking, please don't be another last-minute oil change. When I looked up, she was standing there, not dressed like someone from our side of town, not lost either, just determined. She asked me something simple. Will you be my date this weekend? I laughed at first. I thought it was a joke. I was a 30-year-old mechanic with grease on my hands and a little girl waiting for pancakes in the morning. Women like her didn't walk into places like mine asking for favors like that. But she wasn't joking. Her name was Ivy. She said she needed someone steady, someone normal, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. I should have said no. I had every reason to say no. Emma was 8. She needed stability. I worked hard to keep our life simple. I didn't bring strangers into it. But there was something in Ivy's eyes that night. Not pride, not arrogance, exhaustion. The kind that doesn't come from being busy. The kind that comes from fighting alone. She offered money. More money than I'd ever seen for a weekend. Enough to fix the roof at the shop. Enough to finally start Emma's college fund the way I'd always promised myself I would. And still, that wasn't what made me say yes. It was the way she said, I just need someone beside me. Not someone to rescue her. Just someone to stand there. That part felt familiar, because I knew what it was like to stand alone in a room and pretend you weren't. When Emma's mom left, I learned how to smile through questions, how to answer gently when people judged without meaning to, how to carry weight quietly. So I said yes. I told myself it was just a weekend, just a favor, just pretending. I didn't know then that some pretending has a way of uncovering what's real. I didn't know that saying yes would lead me into a world I didn't understand. Or that somewhere between borrowed suits and careful smiles I would find something I hadn't been looking for. But that's how life works sometimes. It doesn't knock loudly, it just asks a question, and waits to see if you're brave enough to answer. The morning after I said yes, Emma woke me the way she always does. Not gently. She ran down the hallway like the house was on fire and jumped straight onto my bed. Pancakes, she announced as if it were a legal requirement. For a moment I forgot about Ivy, about the money, about the weekend ahead. It was just me and my girl, and the quiet sunlight pushing through thin curtains. I lay there looking at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what I'd agreed to settle in. Dad? Emma squinted at me. You're thinking loud again. I smiled. She'd been saying that since she was 5. Apparently my face folds in on itself when I'm worried. Just work stuff, I told her. That wasn't exactly a lie. After breakfast, while she colored at the kitchen table, I sat across from her, turning Ivy's words over in my head. Just stand beside me. That's what she'd asked for. It didn't sound dangerous. It didn't sound complicated, but nothing that simple ever is. Are you going somewhere this weekend? Emma asked without looking up from her drawing. Maybe, I said carefully. Helping a friend with something important. She nodded like that made sense. Emma's always been that way. She doesn't pry, she trusts. That trust is a heavy thing to carry. By Tuesday, Ivy had sent details. A formal event, family gathering, cocktail attire. I stared at the email longer than I should have. I hadn't worn a suit since Michelle and I got married, and that suit had been rented too. I picked Emma up from school that afternoon and we stopped for ice cream. I don't know if it was guilt or nerves that made me say yes when she asked. Probably both. Dad, she said between bites, are you lonely? The question caught me off guard. Why would you ask that? She shrugged. Sometimes when it's quiet at night, you sit on the porch and don't move for a long time. I didn't realize she noticed. Kids always notice more than we think. I'm not lonely, I said after a moment. That wasn't entirely true either. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I'd learned to live with the first. The second had a way of creeping in when the house got quiet. Friday came quicker than I expected. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror wearing a rented charcoal suit that fit better than it should have. Emma stood in the doorway watching me. You look different, she said. Good different or bad different? Like when people in movies have secrets. I laughed, but something in my chest tightened. It's not a secret, I said softly. I'm just helping someone. She stepped forward and fixed my tie with serious concentration. Don't forget to come back, she said. I crouched down and hugged her. I always come back. And as I walked out that door, I told myself the same thing. It's just a weekend. You're just standing beside someone. You'll come back. What I didn't know yet was that sometimes when you stand beside someone long enough, you stop standing alone. Ivy picked me up herself. No driver, no show, just a quiet black car that looked too polished for my street. When I stepped outside, she was already there, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes focused straight ahead like she was preparing for something bigger than a party. When she saw me, she smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile people use in photographs. It was softer than that. "You look," she paused, studying me, "like you clean up well." "I feel like I'm wearing someone else's life," I said. "That makes two of us." We drove mostly in silence. City lights turned into longer stretches of road. Houses grew larger, fences taller, lawns wider than the park near Emma's school. I rested my hands on my knees and reminded myself to breathe. "You can still change your mind," she said quietly. "I won't hold it against you." I looked over at her. She didn't look nervous. She looked braced. "No," I said, "I'm here." That seemed to steady her. The estate appeared through iron gates, the kind you only see in magazines. Lights glowed warm in tall windows. Music drifted faintly across the yard. It felt like stepping into someone else's world entirely. When we walked in, conversations paused. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. I felt eyes move over me. Measuring, sorting, deciding. I'd been looked at that way before, at parent-teacher conferences when I showed up alone, at weddings where people asked gently, "So, it's just you and Emma?" Judgment doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Ivy slipped her hand into mine. It was a small gesture, but it grounded me. "I'm glad you're here," she murmured, almost too low to hear. And just like that, I stopped thinking about myself. I started watching her, the way her shoulders tightened when certain relatives approached, the way she smiled carefully, the way she measured her words. This wasn't a party for her. It was a test. An older man introduced himself as her uncle. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharper. "And what do you do, Daniel?" he asked. "I run an auto repair shop," I said plainly. There it was again, that quiet pause, the invisible calculation. Mechanic, single father, not their kind of man. But I didn't flinch, because I'd learned something raising Emma alone. You don't shrink just because someone expects you to. You stand steady. I talked about honest work, about teaching my daughter how to change a tire, about long days and simple goals. I didn't try to sound bigger than I was. And somewhere during dinner I noticed something shift. The whispers softened. The looks lingered less. Because there's something disarming about someone who doesn't pretend. Later, when we stepped outside for air, Ivy let out a breath she'd been holding all evening. "They were watching," she said. "I know. Did it bother you?" I looked out across the dark lawn. "No," I said honestly. "I've been watched before." She turned to me then, studying my face like she was trying to understand something deeper. "You're not what they expected," she said. "Good or bad?" "Good," she whispered. "Very good." And standing there under quiet porch lights, with music drifting behind us and judgment fading into the background, I realized something. I hadn't come here just to help her survive. I had come here to remind her she didn't have to. Ivy picked me up herself. No driver, no show, just a quiet black car that looked too polished for my street. When I stepped outside, she was already there, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes focused straight ahead like she was preparing for something bigger than a party. When she saw me, she smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile people use in photographs. It was softer than that. "You look," she paused, studying me, "like you clean up well." "I feel like I'm wearing someone else's life," I said. "That makes two of us." We drove mostly in silence. City lights turned into longer stretches of road. Houses grew larger, fences taller, lawns wider than the park near Emma's school. I rested my hands on my knees and reminded myself to breathe. "You can still change your mind," she said quietly. "I won't hold it against you." I looked over at her. She didn't look nervous. She looked braced. "No," I said, "I'm here." That seemed to steady her. The estate appeared through iron gates, the kind you only see in magazines. Lights glowed warm in tall windows. Music drifted faintly across the yard. It felt like stepping into someone else's world entirely. When we walked in, conversations paused. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. I felt eyes move over me. Measuring, sorting, deciding. I'd been looked at that way before, at parent-teacher conferences when I showed up alone, at weddings where people asked gently, "So, it's just you and Emma?" Judgment doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Ivy slipped her hand into mine. It was a small gesture, but it grounded me. "I'm glad you're here," she murmured, almost too low to hear. And just like that, I stopped thinking about myself. I started watching her. The way her shoulders tightened when certain relatives approached. The way she smiled carefully. The way she measured her words. This wasn't a party for her. It was a test. An older man introduced himself as her uncle. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharper. "And what do you do, Daniel?" he asked. "I run an auto repair shop," I said plainly. There it was again, that quiet pause, the invisible calculation. Mechanic, single father, not their kind of man. But I didn't flinch, because I'd learned something raising Emma alone. You don't shrink just because someone expects you to. You stand steady. I talked about honest work, about teaching my daughter how to change a tire, about long days and simple goals. I didn't try to sound bigger than I was. And somewhere during dinner I noticed something shift. The whispers softened. The looks lingered less. "Because there's something disarming about someone who good," she whispered. "Very good." And standing there under quiet porch lights, with music drifting behind us and judgment fading into the background, I realized something. I hadn't come here just to help her survive. I had come here to remind her she didn't have to. Doesn't pretend. Later, when we stepped outside for air, Ivy let out a breath she'd been holding all evening. "They were watching," she said. "I know. Did it bother you?" I looked out across the dark lawn. "No," I said honestly. "I've been watched before." She turned to me then, studying my face like she was trying to understand something deeper. "You're not what they expected," she said. "Good or bad?" "Good," she whispered. "Very good." And standing there under quiet porch lights, with music drifting behind us and judgment fading into the background, I realized something. I hadn't come here just to help her survive. I had come here to remind her she didn't have to. The party stretched long into the evening. People drifted in and out of conversations like tides. Laughter rose and fell. Glasses clinked. Somewhere a piano played softly in the background. But underneath all of it I could feel something else. Pressure. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It sat at the table with us. Ivy never stopped moving. She floated from guest to guest, answering questions, offering polite smiles, holding my arm just enough to make things look natural. But I noticed the small things, the way her jaw tightened when someone mentioned her father, the way her fingers pressed into my sleeve when a certain board member walked by, the way she glanced at her phone when she thought no one was watching. "You okay?" I asked quietly when we finally found a moment alone near a set of tall windows. She nodded too quickly. "Just tired." That wasn't the whole truth. I'd learned to hear the difference. "You don't have to be strong every second," I said. She looked at me then, really looked. In that second, the polished version of her slipped. "I don't know how not to be," she admitted. There it was. Not pride, not arrogance. Habit. When you grow up being measured, you learn to perform well. When you inherit something heavy, you learn not to drop it. A man approached us soon after. Older. Confident. The kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. He shook my hand firmly. "Daniel, isn't it? I've heard about you." Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. He spoke to Ivy about business matters as if I weren't standing there. About stability and experience and long-term vision. Polite words, sharp edges. When he walked away, Ivy's shoulders sagged slightly. "He's been circling," she said quietly. "Circling what?" "Me." That's when I understood. This wasn't just about bringing a date. It was about showing she wasn't weak. About proving she wasn't alone. About sending a message without saying a word. And suddenly I didn't feel like a hired stand-in. I felt like someone standing guard. Later that night, after most guests had left, we sat outside on a wide porch overlooking dark trees. The house behind us finally quiet. She slipped off her heels and rested her feet against the cool stone. "I hate that I needed this," she said. "Needed what?" "Optics, appearances, proof that I'm fine." "You are fine." She shook her head slightly. "No, I'm surviving." I let that sit between us. The truth has weight, but it doesn't always need fixing. After a while, she said, "You didn't look intimidated." I was, I admitted. Just didn't see the point in showing it. She smiled at that. "You're steady." "I've had practice." We sat in silence a while longer, the kind that isn't awkward, the kind that feels earned. And as I looked at her sitting there barefoot, no audience, no posture, no performance, I realized something had shifted. This wasn't about $20,000 anymore. This wasn't even about pretending. It was about two people who were tired of carrying things alone. And maybe, just maybe, learning what it felt like to set some of that weight down. Sunday morning felt quieter. The house had that hollow sound big places get when most of the guests are gone. Sunlight stretched across the floors. Somewhere in the distance, dishes clinked softly. I woke earlier than I meant to. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I heard Ivy's voice downstairs. Calm, measured, professional. By the time I came down, she was dressed again, not in something fancy, just simple. But the armor was back. Final brunch, she said. Then we're free. Free. It sounded like a small word. It didn't feel small. Brunch was more subdued than the night before. Fewer guests, closer family. Which somehow made it harder. When there are fewer eyes, the ones that remain look sharper. Her uncle asked careful questions about the company, about growth, about future plans. Nothing openly hostile. Just testing. I sat beside her, speaking when spoken to, steady when needed. I didn't try to impress anyone. I didn't shrink either. At one point, her aunt smiled sweetly and said, "Ivy, I hope you're choosing wisely." It was said like advice. It felt like warning. Ivy didn't answer right away. She reached for her coffee instead. Then she said, calm and clear, "I always do." There was something different in her voice. Less defensive, more certain. When we finally walked back to the car, she didn't speak at first. She just drove. About 10 minutes down the road, she pulled over near a stretch of trees and turned off the engine. "I've spent my whole life proving myself," she said quietly. To family, to boards, to people who think I'm too young or too emotional. I waited. She looked at her hands. "I didn't want you here to impress them," she continued. "I wanted you here because when you stand next to me, I feel steadier." That caught me off guard. "I'm just me," I said. "That's the point." We sat there with the engine off and nothing but the wind brushing through trees. "You could have taken the money and kept your distance," she added. "You didn't." I said I'd help. "Yes," she said softly, "you did." When she dropped me back at my apartment later that afternoon, Emma ran into my arms like I'd been gone a year. I held her tighter than usual. Ivy stood a few steps back watching us, and for the first time I saw something in her expression that wasn't guarded. It was longing. That night after Emma fell asleep, I sat alone on the porch like I always do. Only this time the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt full, full of something I wasn't ready to name yet. The weekend was over. The pretending was done. The money would help. Life would go back to normal. But as I sat there listening to the crickets and watching the sky darken, I knew one thing. Whatever that weekend had started, it wasn't finished. 3 weeks passed. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm. Morning school runs, long afternoons at the garage, evenings on the porch with Emma asking questions about the world. The money Ivy paid me helped more than I expected. I fixed the leak in the shop roof, paid off 2 lingering debts, opened a proper college savings account in Emma's name. For the first time in years, I wasn't calculating every dollar in my head before falling asleep. But peace of mind has a funny way of uncovering other things. I found myself looking at my phone more often than usual, not waiting, just checking. There's a difference. She didn't call, and I didn't either. It felt like the respectful thing to do. We had stepped into each other's worlds for a weekend, then stepped back out. That's what grown-ups do, I told myself. We don't complicate things just because something felt good. One Thursday evening, Emma and I were sitting on the porch eating popsicles when she asked, "Are you still helping that lady?" "No," I said. "Do you miss her?" Kids don't circle around questions. They land right on them. I thought about it. "I miss talking to her," I admitted. Emma nodded like she already knew that. "You talk different when you talk about her." "How's that?" "Like you're not tired." That one stayed with me. Later that night, after Emma was asleep, I sat in the quiet and tried to name what I was feeling. It wasn't some dramatic movie-type love. It was simpler than that. I missed the way she listened. Missed the way she looked at me like I wasn't just a mechanic. Missed the way standing next to her felt natural, not forced. I missed being seen. And I had a feeling she might be missing something too, because that weekend wasn't just survival for her. It was the first time I'd seen her set the armor down. The next afternoon, while I was closing up the shop, I heard a knock on the office door. I wiped my hands and stepped outside. There she was. No announcement, no warning, just Ivy standing under the same flickering light where this all began. "You're late," I said gently. "For what?" "For the part where you pretend this didn't mean something." She let out a small breath. "I tried," she admitted. "It didn't work." We stood there in the quiet. No suits, no estate, no audience. Just 2 people on cracked pavement at the end of a long day. "I don't want it to be just a weekend," she said. And just like that, the pretending ended. She didn't look like a CEO that evening. No heels, no polished armor. Just jeans, a soft sweater, and the kind of honesty that makes a person look younger. "I don't want it to be just a weekend," she repeated. I studied her face in the yellow light from the garage window. There was no performance there, no strategy, Just a woman who had fought hard battles and was tired of fighting alone. You know my life isn't simple, I said carefully. It's early mornings and school lunches and oil changes. It's being home when I say I'll be home. I don't want simple, she replied. I want real. That word settled between us. Real. Not rented suits, not family optics, not boardroom victories, just real. Emma comes first, I said. I know. She always will. I wouldn't respect you if she didn't. I believed her. That mattered more than I expected. She took a slow step closer. I missed you, she said quietly. Not the performance. You. There are moments when life asks you a question again. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just softly. Are you brave enough this time? I missed you too, I admitted. And it felt like setting something down I'd been holding in my chest for weeks. We didn't rush. Didn't make big promises. We just stood there on cracked concrete, hands brushing until they finally settled together naturally. Dinner? I asked. A real one? Nothing fancy. I'd prefer that. That Saturday, I picked her up in my truck. Emma watched from the doorway like a tiny supervisor. You're back, she said to Ivy. I am. Good, Dad's less grumpy when you're around. I groaned. Ivy laughed. That night we ate burgers at the little diner Emma and I loved. No one stared. No one measured. No one whispered. Ivy drank a milkshake and smiled like she hadn't in a long time. And when we walked back to the truck, she slipped her hand into mine without thinking. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was quiet.
Steady.
Right. Months passed. We learned each other slowly. She learned how to sit on the porch at sunset without checking her phone. I learned that strength doesn't always look like noise. Sometimes it looks like calm confidence in a room full of doubt. Emma learned that love can grow in unexpected places. And one evening, almost a year after she first walked into my garage, Emma handed us a drawing. 3 stick figures. Me, her, Ivy. Above us, in careful letters, she had written, My family. I looked at Ivy. She looked at me. And in that small, ordinary living room with dishes still in the sink and homework on the table, I understood something. The best parts of life don't arrive with headlines. They show up quietly, sometimes wearing borrowed courage, sometimes asking you to stand beside them. If this story settled somewhere in your heart, stay a while. There's always another quiet moment waiting just beyond the porch.